for their hard work. And also for Jeremy and the live streaming of all these town halls as well. They're all archived on our YouTube channel, and you can see them all on our website at mikelevin.org. I host in-person, telephone, and virtual town halls, as I said, for all constituents who wish to attend. Different formats work well for different people. Really is an honor to serve you. And there's several important updates that I'd like to start with. First is just gratitude. Gratitude for the tremendous firefighters who were able to put out the fire at the Oceanside Pier. I can tell you when I first saw the images and the videos of the pier fire just a couple days ago, I was deeply concerned that the pier would be a total loss. It looked quite bad. But thanks to the great firefighters in the city of Oceanside, along with all the mutual aid that occurred, everybody from the Coast Guard and the federal firefighters on Camp Pendleton to our friends in neighboring cities like Vista and Carlsbad, all the way throughout San Diego County and beyond, CAL FIRE. It just was an extraordinary effort, and all credit goes to them, to Chief Parsons and the team. Also to our great local elected officials in the city of Oceanside. I am committed to doing everything that I can to work with them and to make sure that the Oceanside Pier is rebuilt better than ever before. We'd already been talking to the city of Oceanside about the pier bridge and the need to potentially replace that. And I now know that we'll be discussing the other potential infrastructure needs at the pier as well. But make no mistake, we're going to do all we can to bring federal dollars for this project, as we have for many throughout North County, San Diego, and South Orange County. And I wanted to talk about a few other very important projects as well. When it comes to sand replenishment, I know that many of you in Encinitas and Solana Beach have seen the result of years of work, years of our discussions and negotiations in the halls of Congress and working with the Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that we fund that sand replenishment work. You've seen the large dredge offshore pumping sand onto the beach. And it's been, for me, all 5 years in office working on this, getting the bipartisan infrastructure law across the finish line, and then finalizing the $30 million in federal funds for Encinitas and Solana Beach. And thanks to that work, we've got 700,000 cubic yards of sand placed along 7,200 feet of beach in Solana Beach, and 340,000 cubic yards of sand placed along 7,800 feet of beach in Encinitas. The project concluded this past week, and we've now got nice, wide, sandy beaches just in time to enjoy them this summer. We've also, very importantly, secured a long-term commitment from the Army Corps of Engineers to come back and do regular beach nourishment. The plan calls for every 5-6 years or so for the next 50 years. Now, of course, we'll have to go back and fund every iteration of that at the federal level, but the plan is now in place and the commitment is there from the Army Corps for 50 years. Turning north, sand finally now is getting back on the beaches in San Clemente, and that work is resumed after a delay. You know, I had secured significant funding for the San Clemente Sand Replenishment Project, about $9.3 million through the annual appropriations process. And unfortunately, when the Army Corps came to San Clemente to begin the work earlier this year, it became clear that they had chosen a bad location offshore from which they were planning to pull sand to put on San Clemente's beaches. The location had more cobble and rocks than sand. This mistake by the Army Corps was a setback, no question about that. But I've been working with the city of San Clemente and Mayor Victor Cabral to push the Corps to find solutions to the problems that they created. That's important. They created those problems, and execute the project as Congress directed them to do, and to do so as soon as possible. So it's great to see we've now got sand flowing again in San Clemente, and in the coming weeks, they're going to get about 100,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach between T Street and Linda Lane. Now, it's important to note that that 100,000 cubic yards is significantly less than the volume of sand that Congress directed the Corps to deliver. And the Corps has assured me that they have plans to return later in the year to finish the project, and I'm going to do everything that I can to hold them to that assurance. In the meantime, I'm pleased we're going to have some new sand on the beach in San Clemente in time for the summer as well. Now I'll turn to updates on two major pieces of legislation that recently passed in Congress that were signed into law by the president. First is the long-stalled national security supplemental that the president requested about 6 months ago. You might recall that the president asked Congress to pass legislation to provide direly needed funding for our allies, for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, along with critical humanitarian assistance for Gaza and other vulnerable regions. He also asked for critical emergency funding for our Customs and Border Protection agents. And all of this had broad bipartisan support. But about 6 months ago, House Republicans and some Senate Republicans, really led in the House by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, demanded that this package be attached to changes to immigration law. Otherwise, the Speaker wouldn't allow a vote. So a long bipartisan negotiation started. And that involves Senator Lankford, very conservative senator from Oklahoma, Senator Sinema, independent senator from Arizona, and Senator Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut. The result of this was a package of policies that would have strengthened our border security significantly. It was even endorsed by the law enforcement community responsible for its implementation. It was then, unfortunately, that former President Trump decided he didn't want to accept this bipartisan fix to our border security challenges. And my strong suspicion is that's because he didn't want to give President Biden a win in an election year. So at former President Trump's request, House and Senate Republicans killed the deal that they had demanded just months before. That cynicism set back our efforts to pass funding for our allies, which has had, unfortunately, a very negative impact in the intervening months. It also weakened our border security efforts by denying the much-needed bipartisan funds that we worked so hard to assemble. And while Ukraine has been waiting for this assistance, I think we've seen and heard what has happened in Ukraine, and that's that the tide of Putin's war and the aggression with which it's being waged has changed. And the Ukrainian military has been running low on weapons to the point where they now, according to some reports, have only been able to fire one shell for every 10 that Putin is able to fire at them. So what is amazing to me is that throughout all of this, there has been a pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. It really is inconceivable to me. You have folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene who have been stalling, and that has really given Putin an advantage over these past number of months. But I'm very happy to report that just about a week ago, this logjam finally was broken, and over the strong objections of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Speaker Johnson finally worked with us to pass a legislative package that included most of the aid that the president requested, and I'm very proud that it is now the law of the land and that aid has already started making its way to Ukraine. I'm hopeful that our U.S. funding will bring the fight back to Putin and that Ukraine can push back against Putin's expansionist autocracy. Here's the deal. Democratic allies must stick together. We've got to stand for democracy against tyranny and authoritarianism. Lastly, before I turn to your questions, I wanted to just give you an update on government funding legislation that Congress passed earlier this month. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to set annual spending priorities for the federal government. I think we've seen over the course of the last year, far too many House Republicans seem to be more interested in playing political games rather than funding the government. And that has meant that rather than coming together to fund our shared priorities and negotiate in a bipartisan fashion, actually get it done, they've been busy, blaming us or blaming one another on cable news. So finally, after months of waiting, Speaker Johnson came to the negotiating table, and I think the result was a good one. It was a government funding package that could be supported by those of us on both sides of the aisle who are more interested in actually getting something done as opposed to those cable news appearances that I just mentioned. After we passed the bill in March, President Biden signed it into law, and already we have now seen $17.7 million worth of local community projects that have been announced with resources coming to many parts of our district in the upcoming months. Very excited about that. I'm happy to share there is at least one project for every city in the district, and I'll just go through a few of them. Managed lanes on the 5 in Oceanside, improvements to the Landis Community Center and Park, also in Oceanside, multiple water treatment facilities throughout South Orange County, roadway improvements in Carlsbad, Vista, Encinitas, and Solana Beach, technology for the San Diego County Sheriff's Office to help solve cold case homicides and sexual assaults. It's not just for San Diego County, it's for over 30 law enforcement agencies all across our region and quite a lot more. And beyond these specific projects in our district, the funding package included support for many other priorities that will help our communities. It continues the Department of Energy's work to site a facility that can take the spent nuclear fuel at the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. It helps facilitate additional funding for the Army Corps of Engineers to finish planning a project that'll get more sand on the beaches in Oceanside. It includes funding to continue to reduce the sewage coming across the border from Tijuana, polluting our ocean and our coasts. And critically, it includes significant funding for healthcare and homelessness assistance for our veterans. And as I've said time and time again, one homeless veteran is one too many. So I hope that this type of bipartisan achievement can set an example going forward. And I'm going to continue to work with my Republican colleagues on anything and everything we can to try to help our community and ultimately make progress on the important issues facing our nation. As always, that's my commitment to you. So with that, let me turn to some of your questions. We received lots of questions. I'm going to try to get through as many of them as I can. And we'll start with Thomas from Oceanside, who asks, in regard to the $95 billion bill that passed to provide military aid to Ukraine and Israel, what is the breakdown of this aid and what will the money be used for? Well, Thomas, that's such a great question because if you just watch cable news, you only get the surface. They'll say $95 billion, but they won't really break it down. So I will break it down as best I can. Ukraine will get about $61 billion, and nearly half of that will allow Ukraine to purchase weapons and munitions from the U.S. Many of the weapons are manufactured in California. Funding will be used to restock U.S. arms supplies that have been depleted due to our previous assistance to Ukraine. About 1/3 of the funding will go directly to the Department of Defense to maintain our presence in Europe and support Ukraine through military training and intelligence sharing. About $9.5 billion is for economic assistance for Ukraine and other impacted countries in the region. There's also funding for diplomatic efforts for the State Department and USAID. And that means, help for people who really do need the help the most in the region. And it also includes significant reporting and accountability mechanisms, which are a good thing. The more accountability and transparency, the better. Second, for Israel and Gaza, there's about $26 billion that will go both to support Israel and provide humanitarian relief to Gaza and other conflict areas. The breakdown's as follows: about $16.6 billion that is largely categorized as aid for Israel is actually quite diverse. $4 billion is to replenish our own stocks of weapons in the region. $2.4 billion is for our own military operations in the region related to attacks by the Houthis and Iran. And $5 billion is for Israel's defense systems that intercept missiles and rockets like the ones that were recently launched by Iran. More than $9 billion of the total will go to humanitarian assistance in Gaza and other places around the world experiencing conflict. There's also money in there for Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. About $8 billion will go to Taiwan and Indo-Pacific allies to counter China's regional aggression. About $3.3 billion of that will go towards submarine infrastructure and development. $1.9 billion to replenish U.S. weapons provided to Taiwan and our other regional allies. But I think it's important that people know when they see that $95 billion top line, the reality of where that money will go. It's very significant, very important to understand the context there. Let's go to our second question. This is from Sarah in Del Mar. Sarah asks, if Trump is elected president, would that mean setbacks for clean energy and the accomplishments of the Inflation Reduction Act? Do you foresee any opportunities to work with a Trump White House on sustainable policy? Well, I'm a perennial optimist. I always try to work with anybody that I can. If you come to my office in Washington, D.C., you'll actually see a number of bills on the wall signed by former President Trump. So we have worked with him and his team in the last administration. But I'll be honest, it's tougher to do on environmental and energy policy. We've gotten a great deal done with them on veterans policy that we've passed on a bipartisan basis. But I do think that a second Trump administration, from everything I'm hearing and seeing from him and from his, from the people that prospectively would be on his climate and energy team, I think would be a disaster for the progress that we've made. I think it would set us back. I think it would dramatically harm our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition away from fossil fuels and to embrace a more sustainable future. I think he would do everything possible, along with congressional Republicans, to try to repeal all of the work we've done, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act and the important tax policies that are part of that. Try to undo President Biden's executive actions on reducing pollution, countering the influence of fossil fuel companies. I think he would set back efforts to deploy clean energy generation and investments in clean technologies. And if the past is any indicator, he would appoint oil company executives at the highest levels and try to get former oil lobbyists and maybe even current oil lobbyists to serve in cabinet posts. He did that before. So look, I'm ready to work with any of my House Republican colleagues and anybody in the White House, regardless of who's there, on things that actually make common sense for our environment. And thinking about estuary protection, coastal protection, trying to expand renewable energy on public lands. We'll keep at it. We'll try to do everything we can, but make no mistake, the future of our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lead on the climate crisis really is hanging in the balance. I'll move to the next question. This is from Philip in Carlsbad. And Philip asks, border crossings at San Ysidro have skyrocketed in recent months, and a boat with undocumented migrants landed on the beach recently. This is overwhelming San Diego's resources and compromising public safety. Do you support increased funding to protect our border, and is there a plan to address this issue? Well, Philip, yes, I absolutely do support increased funding to protect our border, no question. And that's why I have voted time and again, including most recently, for the recent government funding package that provided the resources and the tools to the Department of Homeland Security to deal with the increase in border crossings. I think it's important to remember the history here, which is many of my colleagues across the aisle actually wanted to cut funding and assistance to the Department of Homeland Security. But we managed to keep funding levels steady, and we managed to avoid across-the-board cuts. The other thing I will mention is that we were able to secure nationwide $650 million for what's called the Shelter and Services Program. And some Republicans wanted to zero that program out altogether. Of that $650 million, $39 million is coming to the greater San Diego region to help those most in need. It'll help community organizations, think Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, and the like, and it'll help the county itself to support migrants who are seeking shelter, food, and other basic resources. And I'm hopeful that this will help address some of this challenge that we've seen with backlog and with the untenable situation that we've had with migrants crossing over the past number of months. Additionally, I supported the bipartisan Senate agreement that I talked about before. That would have been the toughest border security bill in decades. As I mentioned, former President Trump killed that bill. Actually, they spread a lot of misinformation about what was in that bill, and I think they did so for purely political reasons, and that is a real shame. I don't think anybody on the left or the right should be using immigration as a wedge issue to try to win elections. I think we should all be working together to try to solve our border and immigration challenges, and that's what I'll continue to do. The other thing I'll mention, since you brought up the boat, I support a bipartisan maritime border security bill as well that would expand the U.S. Customs waters from 12 to 24 nautical miles. That would help CBP with additional support to accomplish its duties, including interdicting drugs, addressing issues with migration, human trafficking, and the rest. And Speaker Johnson was supposed to bring this bill to the floor a few weeks ago, but unfortunately was unable. And that's really due to the chaos and dysfunction that was created by Marjorie Taylor Greene and others these past few weeks. I've called on Speaker Johnson to bring the bill up for a vote, and I'm going to continue in that call. It's really critical that we give CBP and their Office of Marine and Aviation the tools, the training that they need to be able to do the job in the waters surrounding San Diego County. And then the last thing I'll say is we need bipartisan solutions that are bigger and more thoughtful around immigration reform generally. I am a proud co-sponsor of what's called the Dignity Act. That's probably the most ambitious bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill in many years. And it combines not only enforcement measures for border security, but also a path to citizenship for those who are working hard and who we want to see contribute positively to our economy and to our country. You know, I had the opportunity recently to sit down in Vista with some folks who are becoming citizens. They were in the process of taking the citizenship test, and I can tell you these are exactly the type of people who are dedicated to our values, who are trying to learn everything they can about our history, and we want them to be contributing members of our local and regional economy. That's what America is all about. So hopefully we can see some momentum for this bill. It's been really tricky, again, because I mentioned there are too many people on both sides of the aisle that would rather just use this issue as a wedge in an election year, and that's a shame. We've got to do better. Let me turn now to Brooke from Encinitas. Brooke asks, I am worried that college students aren't being given their full First Amendment rights in their efforts to protest violence in Gaza. How can Congress work to ensure that student advocates are given their constitutional rights to assembly? Well, let me first say I fully support anybody's First Amendment rights being respected. I think there have been plenty of peaceful protests and some less peaceful. But to the extent that there are peaceful protests, I think that they absolutely deserve their First Amendment rights, the space to protest. I think that it's also true that students should be able to go to class without disruption. I've been horrified by some of the recent reports that I've seen in that regard. I think if protesters are not allowing their peers to learn, that is a real problem. And I've also, frankly, seen videos that show blatant anti-Semitism that is entirely unacceptable, calls for violence or harassment, and I condemn all of it. I think we should all condemn the instances of blatant anti-Semitism that are happening on college campuses, and I think the universities that have this happening need to do more to protect their students. I think we all need to condemn discrimination. We all need to condemn violence when it happens. And that's not only on college campuses, by the way, that's anywhere in our community. Another question from Stephanie from Carlsbad. What can be done to stop powerful judicial figures, such as we saw with the Arizona Supreme Court, from deciding a woman's right to an abortion? Well, each state, Stephanie, differs in how judges are elected or appointed to their state courts. In states where judges are elected by residents, it's up to the voters to elect judges who will interpret the laws without bias. But overarching all of this, I think it's abundantly clear that Congress must make Roe versus Wade the law of the land. We must codify Roe versus Wade, and we've got to restore a woman's right to choose, full stop. I think by making Roe federal law, we can avoid this patchwork of states that differ in abortion rights. And so we've got to enshrine Roe versus Wade into law. I'm going to continue to fight for women to have the right to make their own healthcare decisions. And I can tell you that for one, the individual that I'm running against in this race coming up in November does not support codifying Roe versus Wade and will not do anything to stop his own party from enacting a nationwide abortion ban. Look forward to speaking more about that in the months ahead. Let me turn to Max from Ladera Ranch. He asks, TikTok provides an outlet that makes free speech accessible in a way that other platforms do not due to its algorithm. How can you justify voting to ban it? Well, thank you, Max. I will tell you, first of all, we didn't vote to ban TikTok. As part of this foreign aid bill, there was a provision related to TikTok saying that ByteDance, the parent company, has up to 1 year to divest the American subsidiary of TikTok to a different company that is not controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. We have seen intelligence that has me and my colleagues more than convinced that TikTok poses serious national security risks to the American people, and that simply cannot be overlooked anymore. There's real evidence that ByteDance, the company, is using TikTok in concert with the Chinese Communist Party to collect Americans' personal data, to push its agenda of the CCP on the app by only showing content that fits that agenda. And look, we have to full stop protect Americans against data collection by the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what this bill would do. TikTok will continue, Max, to operate in the United States so long as ByteDance sells the American asset. And it's up to ByteDance to do that. And we've given them a year to do it. And I think that's a reasonable request, a reasonable thing for us to have done in this bill. Next up is Rachel from Oceanside. Rachel asks, when will the U.S. government finally apply the pressure it needs on Netanyahu and the Israeli right-wing government to stop the excessive civilian violence in Gaza? Well, thank you, Rachel, for that question. I have been saying now for months, actually since last December, that we need new leadership in Israel. But we also must ensure that Hamas is out of power. Both sides need new leadership. And I stand by that position. One Israeli civilian dying, one Palestinian civilian dying is one too many. I have also been very clear that I support a ceasefire paired with the release of all remaining hostages. That includes the American hostages still being held by Hamas. And it's on the leadership of Hamas to release those hostages. And that's how we're going to end this conflict in the near term. I appreciate the Biden administration's work to secure the release of the hostages, appreciate the implementation of humanitarian access zones in the region. I know that Secretary Blinken is heading back to the Middle East this coming week. And look, the administration has been pushing hard on Netanyahu. They did get concessions in regards to humanitarian aid. They also have been pushing hard on the Israeli government to meet the terms that our Arab partners in the region have said would be necessary for a hostages for ceasefire agreement. But unfortunately, Hamas has been unwilling to negotiate the release of hostages. That's not my opinion. Those are the facts on the ground. Next question. This is from Jeff from Laguna Niguel. How many American hostages are still being held by Hamas? Jeff, there are 5 American hostages still being held by Hamas that are believed to be alive. We certainly hope that they are alive. My understanding is the administration also believes that the remains of 3 other American hostages are being held by Hamas. Earlier in the week, you might have seen one of the living American hostages. There was a video that was released of Hirsch Goldberg Poland. This was a propaganda video that Hamas released, and it showed that he's missing a hand. I can only imagine what his parents and his family are going through. It was absolutely an awful thing to see. And I met with hostages' families on a number of occasions, and they've got to remain the top priority, along with, obviously everybody in the region, civilian in any part of this, any part of the Middle East right now who's at risk. That's one civilian too many. This is from Stacy from San Clemente. What is the latest update on the sand replenishment in San Clemente? Thank you, Stacy. I mentioned this at the outset. The work has begun again after a significant delay to get sand on the beach between T Street and Linda Lane. About 100,000 cubic yards are going to be placed there between now and roughly the next 5 or 6 weeks. After which, the company that is doing the dredging has another project that they have to move to up in the Pacific Northwest. They will then, hopefully, with our help and with the Army Corps' help, be able to come back down to San Clemente later in the year to finish the job. The problem started because the Army Corps' site, the borrow site as they call it, really did not have acceptable sand. And they found that out once they started doing that initial dredge. You may have seen the dredging equipment a number of months ago. When it was clear that they could not use that borrow site, they decided, the construction company decided, along with the Army Corps, to move on to the Encinitas and Solana Beach projects. They then completed those projects, and now they're moving back to San Clemente. The new borrow site is further away. It's north up in Surfside, and it takes longer to get the equipment to and from. And that means that less sand can be pumped in the same amount, that window of time that we had. So we need to come back. The Army Corps and the contractor needs to come back later in the year and finish the job, and also not stick San Clemente with the bill, given that it was the Army Corps' responsibility and their mistake with regard to the original borrow site. I hope all that makes sense. Next is Bert from Monarch Beach, and Bert asks, there have been lots of news articles lately on the decrease in demand for electric vehicles. Why do you think demand has declined? Well, I think it's interesting, who's writing these articles. I always try to ask, if I'm reading an article, who's behind it? What is their agenda? And I do think that, there are some legitimate articles out there about the demand for EVs. I think that this is a narrative to a certain degree being pushed by the fossil fuel industry and by folks like the American Petroleum Institute and the big oil companies who do not want to see a decrease in demand for gasoline. And having fully electric vehicles replace internal combustion engines will be a big hit to them. And I think they're doing everything they can to push the narrative that nobody wants an EV. I can tell you that's patently false. The demand for EVs is actually still up in the first quarter of 2024 compared to that of 2023. I think there are a number of new models on the market that are pretty exciting. I also think we have to ensure they're affordable. And I know that Congress is addressing that through the expanded tax credits for new and used EVs that we passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Look, I'm hopeful that as the technology continues to improve, prices will come down. I'm also watching very closely the $7.5 billion that we secured through the bipartisan infrastructure law to build 500,000 new EV chargers across the country. It needs to be as easy to drive your EV from one coast to the other as it is to drive your gasoline vehicle. I can tell you that in our family, we just drove from California to Arizona and back in an EV, and it was a great experience and one that wouldn't have been possible, just a handful of years ago. But look, I think that prices still need to come down. There's no question, and they will. I think, as is the case with any emerging and new technology, we'll see prices come down significantly. Next question is from Rob from Oceanside. And Rob asks, in this presidential election year, do you think we're better off than we were 4 years ago? That's a great question, Rob. That's the old Ronald Reagan question from 1980. Here's what I will tell you. I think, unlike back then, I think when you look at right now, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? Our economy is growing. Unemployment's in record low. We recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, which the previous president said, go and inject bleach, didn't take it seriously. At this time in 2020, think about where we were 4 years ago. Our country was experiencing a terrible pandemic. Thousands of people were dying on a daily basis. Former President Trump had no plan that would save lives as we needed. He ignored the advice of medical professionals in many cases. And we're absolutely better off today than we were in the throes of the pandemic. There's no question about it. I would also say that it's not just about the past, it's about the future. It's about who we are and who we want to be as Americans. I think it's about protecting democracy. It's about expanding rights, not taking them away, protecting freedoms, not having fewer freedoms, ensuring our country is a place where we can all thrive. We're being presented this November with a really stark choice, a real difference. And I think it's up to us to allow the narrative out there to actually comport with facts, and rather than the misinformation, the disinformation being pushed that ultimately doesn't ring true in most cases. The former president tells a very dark picture, and it's simply not the America that I see on a day-to-day basis. Sam from Vista says or asks, your office recently put out a statement on new funding that you're bringing to North County. Could you walk us through the details? Absolutely. I did that at the outset, but I will tell you again, $17.7 million for federal funding for 15 projects throughout the district. Every single city in our district received at least one project. And look, everything from quality of life improvements, roads, water infrastructure, providing law enforcement with the tools and the training that they need. Vista, for one example, got $850,000 for the Emerald Drive project. That's an area of Vista where they've really needed that investment for some time. Bike lanes, better walking paths in that area, and ultimately a lot safer for pedestrians. Here's the amazing thing. So since we started in 2019, when you look at all the funding that we've received from the community projects, the annual appropriations cycle, from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and from the American Rescue Plan, you add it all up, and in 5 years, we've been able to deliver $863 million and counting of federal funds to our district. And that's pretty incredible. If you go to our official website, you can see a breakdown of every single project and how the money was spent. And it's an interactive map that you can visit at levin.house.gov. Very proud of that. Lewis from Oceanside asks, funding for the Affordable Connectivity Program is set to run out in May, and many providers are cutting off service at the end of April. More than 20 million households rely on this benefit for broadband and phone service. What is being done to make sure that 20 million American households don't get cut off from internet and phone service? Well, let me say this. I am absolutely in agreement with you. I share your concern completely. It is absolutely unacceptable that we're coming this close to the expiration for this program. We've got to extend it immediately, and we've said that time and again. For those, take a step back. If you're not familiar with this program, $30 a month to eligible low-income households to help them connect to broadband, and nearly 23 million American homes are enrolled in this program. So I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that would extend it, called the Affordable Connectivity Program Extension Act, to keep it operating. I also called for an extension of the program to be included in the government funding legislation that I mentioned at the outset. And unfortunately, House Republicans decided to block its inclusion, which is so sad because this Affordable Connectivity Program is not for red states, blue states, red districts, blue districts. It's all Americans who benefit when they are connected, and they can be connected at a price that they actually can afford. It's so critically important. If, hopefully we can get this done on a bipartisan basis. It really could be devastating if we do not. So those are all the questions for now. I'm so grateful to everybody for those excellent questions. As always, if you have more questions or you have other things that are on your mind, we want to hear from you. We do these once a month. We try to get through as many of these questions as we can, but I encourage you to email us. You can email info@mikelevin.org, and you also can visit our official website, Levin.org, M-I-K-E-L-E-V-I-N, excuse me, M-I-K-E-L-E-V-I-N. I've only said it a million times, .org. And you can go on there and you can see lots more about me and what we've accomplished throughout our 5 years representing the community. I want to thank everybody again for tuning in. I want to thank our great team again, both here in the district and in Washington, D.C. I want to thank my family as well for putting up with the crazy congressional schedule. Toughest part of the job by far is not being able to spend more time with them. And I'm very, very grateful to you, our constituents. I always say representative is not just my job title, it is my job description. And I need as much interaction and input from you as possible to be able to do my job effectively. So I look forward to seeing you very soon, whether at one of these virtually or in person. Until then, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.